Broken Open, Finding Your Way Through Grief's Wilderness. The first time I heard Jimmie Ware speak about grief, something shifted in the room. There was this collective exhale, as if everyone present had been holding their breath, waiting for permission to acknowledge what they'd been carrying silently. Jimmie isn't just a grief counselor, she's a revolutionary who walks into the darkest corners of human experience carrying nothing but her wisdom and an unwavering belief that we can find our way back to light. Her work has transformed countless lives in communities where grief often goes unacknowledged, offering a roadmap through terrain many find impossible to navigate alone. Today, I want to share what I learned from my conversation with Jimmie. Wisdom that might just change how you understand not only grief, but the extraordinary capacity we have to rebuild after devastating loss. We've all heard the five stages of grief, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. A neat little package that suggests grief moves in orderly fashion from point A to point B. But here's what Jimmie taught me: grief isn't linear, it's not a checklist. It's more like weather. Some days are thunderstorms, violent, overwhelming, flooding everything in sight. Some days are foggy, where you can't quite see clearly, but you're moving through it anyway. And yes, some days the sun breaks through unexpectedly, warming your face when you least expect it. The problem isn't grief itself. The problem is that we've been taught to believe grief should follow rules, that it should be productive, that it should eventually end. But what if we've been thinking about this all wrong? It's funny how we try to organize even our most chaotic emotions into tidy little boxes. We're so desperate to make sense of suffering that we've created an entire industry around grief management, as if grief is some unruly employee that needs to be put on a performance improvement plan. Sorry, grief, but your emotional outbursts in the grocery store are becoming disruptive to workflow. We're going to need you to contain yourself to designated crying periods between 7 and 7:30 p.m. In Chicago, a remarkable story unfolded when a Black poet who had suddenly lost her mother found herself writing poems every night as the only way to breathe through her pain. What began as private ritual eventually became a nonprofit organization hosting monthly open mics where community members shared their own grief stories through spoken word. Traditional mental health resources had felt inaccessible to many in this community, culturally disconnected, financially out of reach. But poetry was theirs. Poetry could hold everything. Within just 1 year, over 200 people had participated in these events. Local schools began adopting similar programs for youth grief support. The ripple effect spread to other cities, creating culturally rooted healing spaces centered on creative expression. One participant said, "Before these gatherings, I thought I was losing my mind. I didn't know grief could look like forgetting to eat for days, then suddenly crying in the cereal aisle. Here, I learned my grief had a home, and slowly I found my way back to myself." This is what happens when we honor grief's messy truth instead of trying to sanitize it. At a behavioral health clinic serving primarily women of color, therapists developed a revolutionary approach to supporting those experiencing miscarriage or stillbirth, losses often dismissed or minimized in our society. Many clients arrived with symptoms consistent with PTSD, flashbacks, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, but had been told to just try again, or at least you can get pregnant. The unspoken message: your grief is inconvenient, excessive, unnecessary. The clinic introduced mindfulness routines, deep breathing exercises that anchored clients in their bodies when panic threatened to sweep them away. They encouraged journaling as release, simple rituals of remembrance like lighting candles on significant dates. Group sessions focused on emotional validation rather than fixing feelings. One woman who had suffered 3 miscarriages wrote, "For years, I carried this invisible weight. No funerals, no sympathy cards, just expected to show up at work the next day like nothing happened." In this group, I finally heard the words, "Your babies mattered. Your grief matters." That permission to acknowledge my loss saved my life. The clinic eventually published an online toolkit downloaded thousands of times by grieving families seeking culturally sensitive guidance. Conversations about reproductive trauma began happening in communities often left out of mainstream narratives around grief recovery. This is what becomes possible when we make space for grief's full expression. In Oswego, Illinois, Holistically Divine Counseling offers specialized support groups for Black adults coping with major losses. Many clients report feeling pressure from family and culture to be strong while struggling privately under waves of sadness, guilt, numbness, and confusion. Counselors employ what's called the dual process model, validating both loss oriented emotions, expressing pain, honoring memories, and restoration oriented actions, trying new hobbies, routines, community service. This approach acknowledges a profound truth. We don't get over significant loss. We learn to oscillate between remembering and living forward, between honoring what was and creating what might be. Group members gradually re engage with life outside their immediate circle, volunteering at youth centers, hosting cultural events, sharing stories at public forums. Many who had never attended counseling before became peer mentors themselves. Retention rates doubled compared to standard individual counseling models. One participant who lost his teenage son to gun violence said, "I thought grief would be my prison. Now I understand it's also my purpose. Every young man I mentor carries a piece of my son's legacy forward." This is what healing looks like when we understand that grief transforms us rather than diminishes us. From these stories and Jimmie's insights, 3 powerful truths emerge. First, grief is not linear. Honor your unique journey. Each person's process of moving between pain and healing will look different. And that's not only valid, it's necessary. There is no timeline, no expiration date on grief. Some losses we carry forever, just in different ways as time passes. Second, reclaiming life beyond loss requires both self care and community. True resilience comes from tending to yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and reaching out to support others. Practices like therapy, mindfulness, creative expression, volunteering, and mentoring are all powerful ways to rebuild after loss. We heal ourselves partly by helping others heal. Third, sharing stories builds generational strength. When we pass down lived truths through storytelling, we preserve wisdom for younger generations while fostering cultural awareness and inclusion. Our collective stories help restore the art of conversation in a tech driven world and ensure our villages remain strong. I'm reminded of something Jimmie often says: grief is the price we pay for love. And while that price can feel unbearably high, would any of us truly choose never to have loved at all? The question isn't whether we'll experience grief, we will. The question is how we'll carry it and whether we'll carry it alone. Here's what I know for certain. Throughout human history, in every culture, people have found ways to transform suffering into meaning, to build beauty from ashes, not because they're superhuman, but because this capacity for resilience lives in all of us. The Chicago poet who turned her private pain into community healing, the women who found solidarity after pregnancy loss when society offered none, the father who channeled his grief into mentorship after losing his son. These aren't exceptional stories. They're reminders of what's possible when we honor grief's complexity instead of fearing it. So, what might this mean for you? Perhaps it means giving yourself permission to grieve in your own way, at your own pace, without apology or explanation. Perhaps it means creating small rituals that acknowledge your loss while also gently turning your face toward life again. Perhaps it means reaching out to yourself first, then to others. I challenge you today to break the conspiracy of silence around grief, to recognize that our culture's discomfort with pain has created an epidemic of isolated suffering that none of us should have to endure. Start one small daily act that honors your journey through loss: a journal entry before bed, a walk, remembering someone you love, or simply sharing your truth aloud without judgment. Then reach outward, mentor someone younger than you, or check in on another who may be hurting quietly nearby. As Jimmie Ware's work so powerfully demonstrates, we rebuild our villages through action, both gentle and bold, through honoring our wounds while refusing to be defined by them alone. The path through grief isn't about getting back to normal. There is no going back, there is only going forward, changed, deepened, perhaps even broken open in ways that ultimately allow more light to enter. I stand before you today not to minimize your pain or to suggest that all wounds heal completely. Some losses change us forever, but I am here to tell you that those very wounds, the ones that have broken you open, can become portals to a deeper, more authentic way of living. When we stop running from grief, when we learn to carry it with grace rather than shame, we discover something revolutionary. Our capacity to love doesn't diminish with loss, it expands. Our ability to connect with others doesn't weaken, it deepens. Our understanding of what matters most doesn't blur, it clarifies with stunning precision. This is your invitation to step into grief's wilderness, not as a victim, but as an explorer, to map its terrain, not just for yourself, but for those who will inevitably follow, to leave behind breadcrumbs of wisdom that say, I was here, I survived this, and so will you. The world needs your unfiltered truth. It needs your hard won wisdom. It needs the medicine that only comes from those who have walked through fire and emerged, not unchanged, but undefeated. So I ask you, what will you do with your broken openness? How will you transform your pain into purpose? Who might be waiting for exactly the light that now shines through your cracks? This is how we honor both those we've lost and the life that insists on continuing. This is how we find our way through grief's wilderness, not by conquering it, but by learning its terrain, not by rushing through it, but by allowing it to teach us what only it can teach. Together, broken open, made whole again in entirely new ways.